We are back here now on the show to jump into our second segment, more on the Dallas Cowboys and this scenario that popped up that I saw from the Dallas website with two guys talking about it, the two hosts, and it got me thinking of this hypothetical situation that the Cowboys could find themselves in if worse comes to worse. So a little bit of a context here. Dallas is taking, it seems like, ages to figure out these contract negotiations with Dak Prescott. It random also that if you guys saw the social media post of Dak Prescott walking in a boot, most random thing ever because he's on break right now. And he said, according to some reports that I saw, that it is just typical protocol with his injury going back to 2020. He just does it almost as a precaution. But I saw another thing that he's dealing with a foot sprain now. So debating, reports coming out of it, it's just a crazy thing to see Dak in a boot. Definitely doesn't help his contract negotiations if the Dallas Cowboys see that, if he's in a boot and how that affects him going into the year. But regardless of that, Dak's going to cost a lot, probably, most likely if he signs a new deal. And now what could be done about that? If the Cowboys at the end of the day don't decide to re-sign him, don't decide to extend him, what could be an alternative? Well, they have one sitting right there on the bench in Trey Lance because they did use a fourth-round pick on him, and he still is just there as a glorified backup. And we haven't really seen too much of him since 2022 when he suffered that injury. So the trial is still out on him, really. There's really hardly a trial out on him because we haven't really seen him in the NFL other than a game and a half or 2 games, whatever it was, before he got injured with the 49ers. And now this was brought up on the Dallas Cowboys website site. Nick Eatman and Kurt Daniels were talking about it, about this scenario of how Trey Lance could actually affect Dak Prescott's negotiations. And it brought up an interesting point, and one where it kind of diverged me into this thinking process of where these negotiations could go. Nick Eatman was the one that mentioned this quote. He said, "I think they're waiting on a few things regarding Dak, and one of them could be Lance and how he plays. The other is probably Dak and how this season goes for him." He also mentioned that he could see the contract negotiations carrying on into the season, maybe until the end of the season with Dak Prescott. So not the most optimistic view on this situation if you want to get it done before training camp and then move on to CeeDee Lamb's contract negotiations if Dak still remains the priority. But that last part where he said the other is probably Dak and how this season goes for him, but in the same breath he mentioned that one of them could be Trey Lance and how he plays this season. It got me into this scenario, right? You're trying to decide what's best for the Dallas Cowboys going forward. And it's a delicate situation now with Dallas because you have to see what Trey Lance is. You have to see what he's about, where he's at, how well does he know this offense, how well he has developed personally and as a quarterback just in general. So he's expected to get most of the preseason snaps. There's no way they throw Dak out there because he is a projected starter, obviously. But if you put Trey Lance out there just for the preseason, I don't think that's a good enough sample size to determine anything because most people don't really realize that they didn't pick up the 5th-year option on Trey Lance, so this is the final year of his contract. You're going to have to make a decision on him going forward. Same thing with Dak. Dak's in the final year of his contract, and you have to decide if you're going to invest $50 million, $55 million, $60 million on Dak going forward just based off of how he plays this year. So now you find yourself in a weird situation where you have only one starting quarterback spot and you have to try and figure out which quarterback is the one you want to go with going forward. Obviously, it's going to be Dak playing. There's no way, unless a miracle happens or he really does suffer a horrible injury, that Dak is not going to be the starter. So they're going to almost get their wish, and that question is almost answered for them. This season, we're going to see how Dak plays. If they really need some more guarantees, some more facts out there that Dak is really worth this amount of money, we're going to see it this year from Dak unless, like I said, he gets hurt. But then where does that leave Trey Lance? It's a weird spot because say you decide to go with Dak. We're going to see where the season goes. If he plays out of his mind again and maybe they win a playoff game, they get further into the playoffs this year by some, unforeseen circumstance, then we're going to give him $55, $57 million. But again, if you wait and don't extend him and just let him play out the year, the possibility still exists that they could still be priced out of Dak if after the season he decides that I'm still going to test out free agency. This contract's not good enough. I'm going to test out free agency. And then you waited all that time and you still didn't re-sign him. You used up his last year, and now you're left not only without a quarterback, but without really knowing what you have in Trey Lance because you decided to stick with Dak and see how the season went for him. Now you're really lost on Trey. Are you going to extend Trey Lance based off of the fact that you almost have no other choice unless you go fishing in the free agent market or think that you're going to draft your next franchise quarterback in next year's draft? But then on the flip side, you're going to flip it now onto Trey Lance. Say, for whatever reason, Trey Lance plays more than the preseason. He plays into the regular season. Now you're trying him out, and it is a risk because it's almost as close as you can get to not really taking the season seriously, if that makes sense, because it's such a huge gamble to throw Trey Lance out there, not having played since 2022. He can play all the preseason, and still I would have my doubts about how he looks at game speed against guys that are actually trying to tackle him to the ground instead of preseason where it's about 60, 70%. So that's a risk in it of itself in having Trey Lance out there if you really want to see how this season goes for him, to have more of a steady mind going forward that if Dak Prescott moves on, we've seen enough out of Trey, we could extend him and do it that way. Very similar situations where you have to decide on what to do for both of these quarterbacks, and I don't know how you do decide. The obvious answer seems to be Dak, but it's not too obvious for me because of the fact that it just comes down to, is this team going to be that much better with Dak as their quarterback? Say Dak wants to stay. Say that Dak wants to be the long-term quarterback here. He says, forget free agency. I want to re-sign with the Cowboys. It comes down to, are the Cowboys still going to be an okay, mediocre team with Dak Prescott now getting paid $50 million? Is that a bigger risk than saying, all right, we're still going to be good. We're not going to be that much better with Dak. Let's just start Trey Lance going forward and start this rebuild officially. Which one is a bigger risk? Starting with Trey, siding with Trey Lance, or paying Dak $50 million and not being that much better anyway? I think that's a legitimate question because it's not so much about Dak and his ability. I just worry that this team right now where they stand with nobody knows where these contract negotiations are going with CeeDee Lamb. The offensive line is a little bit spotty. Outside of CeeDee, do you have that much confidence in Brandon Cooks and Jalen Tolbert to give you some more firepower? Ferguson's good. Jake Ferguson's decent, but we've only really seen that one breakout year from him. Then at running back, is that built up enough where you think you can complement the passing game so much with Ezekiel Elliott back there and the rest of them in a committee? Mike McCarthy's also on his last year, so does that affect anything on this season on how a new head coach comes in? And say the Cowboys pay Dak $50+ million and the new head coach, if they don't re-sign Mike McCarthy, doesn't really like Dak, and now you have a whole new problem on your hands. So I'm just spitballing here a little bit, but these are all genuine concerns that I have with paying Dak $50 million+ and not having this team be any better, because I think it's just the surrounding cast that needs to improve, not so much the quarterback. That's why if I were to make a decision which is the bigger risk, I would probably say Dak, because the Cowboys are already in a hole with their salary cap, and if you're going to invest so much money into Dak, I know it's the quarterback. I know people want to have a quarterback, a top 10 quarterback, to feel more secure, to give themselves at least of a chance. But it's going back to that same thing. Let's not be so zoned in on the quarterback and having him there, paying him so much money, and this team is not even that much better than when, say, we started Trey Lance. That's why I almost would rather start Trey Lance and, just wipe everything away. Most likely you're going to bring in a new head coach, bring him in, extend Trey Lance. Maybe it is a little bit more likely that you could bring back Trey Lance in free agency, just because I find it hard to believe another team is itching to bring Trey Lance in free agency. As soon as free agency starts, he's on a different team. I don't think the market's like that for him at all. So you could bring in a new coach. I don't think Mike McCarthy's going to stay. Bring him in, see what he thinks about Trey Lance, since you guys already feel comfortable with him, and you decide to extend him, definitely much cheaper. It improves your salary cap, at least in the moment. Dak, unfortunately, moves on. You're going to hate to see it, but you're just going to have to rip the bandage off. I think at this point, because if you wait on Dak, like Nick Eatman says, and it takes up the whole season, where does that leave CeeDee Lamb? Are you just going to push the contract negotiations back even further with him? He's going to hold out of training camp most likely, so if you just keep pushing it further and further and back, is he going to be there during the regular season? And then he's also on the last year of his contract, so if nothing gets done sooner rather than later, what's the situation going to be with him? Are you going to risk getting closer to free agency to try and re-sign him, or maybe have him hit the market? Hopefully not. Hopefully that's the last resort. But with Dak being the priority, it just pushes everything back here in the last minute, and it's not something that is an ideal situation by any means. It's a tough choice to make, but for me, I think I've seen enough of these gymnastics, jumping with Dak, let's pay him this amount of money, what does CeeDee Lamb get? I think you're just going to have to move on from Dak, and it probably benefits Dak also a lot more if he hits free agency, has more teams bidding for him. He can earn himself a higher contract. It comes down to the point that I just think this has just run its course with the Cowboys and Dak. Not to say that Dak is done, but just with the pairing of the Cowboys, I think that we've seen it reach its ceiling. So I think it's just time for a fresh start, wipe everything, bring in a new head coach, and stick with Trey Lance, and just figure it out from there. It's going to be tough because everybody is going to be on the Dallas Cowboys, and just they're bad this year. Why did they move on from Dak? And you're going to hear everything under the sun about them if they decide to go this way, but I think it is needed. It is a needed step to take with the Dallas Cowboys now, where they're not getting that much better with Dak, honestly, with this team. The surrounding cast, in my opinion, got worse, so is it worth spending all that money on him with Micah Parsons' extension coming up and also CeeDee Lamb? It just benefits everybody, in my opinion, where I stand on that point. So that's where I'm feeling. That's where I think the Cowboys should go. It's highly unlikely because of where it is right now. Everybody wants their quarterback there ahead of everything else. So I'll be surprised if they do it, but I really think this is the best solution for them going forward. So as always, let me know what you guys think of this. Which is the bigger risk, and what would you guys rather do? Keep Dak and pay him 50 plus, or risk it and start all over with Trey Lance? Leave your guys' thoughts in the comments section. And with that being said, we're going to move on with the rest of the show, but we're going to go into a quick break, and when we return, a look at the Atlanta Falcons and what their star wide receiver, Drake London, said that he expects out of this team, and what have they been really emphasizing throughout this offseason to get to the potential that everybody knows that they can get to in 2024. Stick around and find out what he said on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.